A man on a horse rode into a town called Redemption Creek, but there was no redemption there, only fear. The sun beat down like a hammer on an anvil, and the dust was so thick you could taste it. The town was quiet, too quiet. You know the kind of quiet I'm talking about, the kind that comes right before a rattlesnake strikes. The man's name was Caleb Rivers, but a name is just a sound people make. What he was a ghost, a man haunted by a past he couldn't outride. His eyes, the color of a frozen lake, scanned the street. He saw women pulling their children inside, men in dusty hats whispering in shadows, their conversations dying the moment he looked their way. This town was sick with a secret. Caleb had seen it before. A sickness of the soul that infects a place, makes it rot from the inside out. He wasn't looking for trouble, but trouble, it seems, had been waiting for him. He was about to nudge his horse and keep on riding, leave this place to its own damn misery. And then he heard it, a scream, a child's scream, thin and sharp and full of a kind of pain that has no bottom. It cut through the thick, hot air and went straight into Caleb's bones. Every instinct, every hard-learned lesson from a life on the trail told him to ride on. Mind your own business. A smart man doesn't go chasing other people's ghosts. But Caleb had long ago stopped caring about being smart. He cared about right and wrong. And that scream was wrong. He turned his horse, a sturdy bay mare who'd seen as much trouble as he had, and followed the sound into the maze of shacks and lean-tos behind the main street. His hand fell to the grip of his Colt .45, the weight of it familiar, comforting. It was an old friend that had never lied to him. The screams came again, closer now, and they were mixed with something else. The ugly, guttural laughter of adults enjoying their cruelty. He rounded the corner of a dilapidated house, and what he saw there would be burned into his memory for the rest of his days. In the middle of a dirt yard, two people were holding down a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 12. The man was a brute, thick-necked and mean-eyed. The woman was his match in cruelty, thin and sharp as a shard of broken glass. They were hacking off the girl's dark hair with a pair of rusty sheep shears, laughing as she sobbed. Chunks of her hair lay in the dust like dead birds. The girl's face was a mess of old bruises and fresh tears, her dress nothing but patched-up rags. But that wasn't the worst of it. Oh no, it wasn't even close. Lying in a small, wicked-looking fire nearby was a branding iron, its tip glowing a malevolent cherry red. It was a cattle brand, and they were getting ready to put it on her face. Caleb felt the world go cold and silent around him. He'd seen bar fights, seen men shot down in dusty streets. He'd seen the casual cruelty of a hard land. But this was different. This was the devil's work, plain and simple. And then Caleb noticed the design on the brand. A serpent eating its own tail. His blood turned to ice. It was the same symbol he'd been chasing for 5 long years. The same symbol that was carved into the locket he wore under his shirt. The locket that had belonged to his little sister Sarah before she was taken. He dismounted, his boots making no sound in the dust. The man, Jasper, and the woman, Dolores, were too lost in their torment to notice him. "Hold still, you little witch!" The woman, Dolores, snarled. "Mr. Cartwright wants you marked proper before you're sent on." The man laughed. "Yeah, this'll make sure you remember who you belong to." The girl choked out a single word. "Please." That one word was all it took. Caleb's past and present collided in that filthy backyard. This wasn't just a random girl. This was his sister's story, happening all over again. And he'd be damned if he let it end the same way. "That's enough," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the air like a razor. The two tormentors froze, their heads snapping up. They saw a tall stranger standing there, his face a mask of cold fury, his hand hovering over the butt of his pistol. He looked like the angel of death had decided to take a stroll through Redemption Creek. The man, Jasper, puffed out his chest. "This ain't your concern, Drifter. Move along." Caleb took one step forward. I said, "Step away from the girl." Dolores, the woman, saw something in Caleb's eyes that Jasper missed. She saw a man who had already crossed a line, a man with nothing left to lose. She let go of the girl and scrambled back. "Jasper, don't!" she hissed. But Jasper was too proud, or too stupid. He grabbed the glowing branding iron from the fire. "She's our property, bought and paid for. We got the papers." Caleb's gun cleared the holster in a blur. The click of the hammer being cocked was the loudest sound in the world. "You have 1 second," Caleb said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was more terrifying than any shout. "Drop it." Jasper hesitated. It was the last mistake he'd ever make. But he didn't drop the iron. Instead, he lunged. Caleb didn't shoot to kill. He shot to maim. The bullet tore through Jasper's shoulder, spinning him around. The branding iron flew through the air and landed in the dust, hissing like a snake. Dolores screamed and ran for the house, shrieking for the sheriff, for help, for anyone. The little girl, Annie, scrambled away from the fallen man and crawled toward Caleb like he was salvation itself. He holstered his gun and knelt, scooping her into his arms. She was light as a feather, all sharp bones and trembling fear. "You're safe now," he whispered. She clung to him, burying her face in his chest, her body racked with sobs. Over her head, Caleb saw the town waking up. Doors were slamming open. Men were shouting. The sickness was coming for them. He lifted her onto his horse, settling her in front of him. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice rough but gentle. "Annie," she whispered. "They say my name is Annie." He spurred his horse, not towards the open country, but deeper into the twisted alleys of the town. Running was what they expected. Running was a mistake. He needed answers. That brand, it meant this wasn't just two cruel people. It was an organization. And that meant the whole town was in on it. He could feel their eyes on him as he galloped through the backways, a ghost with a rescued child, riding straight into the heart of the rot. He didn't know if he was riding to save her or to get them both killed. Maybe they were the same thing. Caleb found refuge in the last place they'd look, the church. It was empty, smelling of old wood and forgotten prayers. He barred the door and gently set Annie down on a pew. She was still shaking, her eyes wide with a terror so deep it looked ancient. He took out his canteen and gave her a drink. They do that to all of us," she whispered, her voice hoarse. Caleb's blood ran cold. "All of you? There are others?" She nodded, pulling up the ragged sleeve of her dress. On her small arm was a fresh bruise, but underneath it, faded and pale, was another mark. A tattoo, a serpent eating its own tail. "They bring us from the city, from the orphanages. The Fletchers are just the handlers. They get us ready." "Ready for what?" Caleb asked, his voice tight. Annie looked away toward the stained glass window, where a pale, sad-eyed Jesus looked down on them. "For the buyers. Men come in the night. Rich men. Mr. Cartwright, the banker, he arranges it. He calls us specialty goods." The words hit Caleb like a physical blow. Specialty goods. This wasn't just cruelty. This was a market, a business. Human beings, children, bought and sold like cattle. And the town's most respected citizen, the banker, was the auctioneer. The Serpent brand wasn't just for ownership. It was a mark of quality, a sign that the product was ready for sale. The sickness in Redemption Creek had a name, greed, and it ran all the way to the top. He thought of his sister, Sarah. Had she been a specialty good too? Had she been marked, prepared, and sold to some monster in the night? The rage inside him was a physical thing, a hot, roaring fire. He'd come to this town by chance, but now he knew he was here for a reason. He was here to burn it all down. He heard them outside now, a mob, not just a posse, but the whole town. Men with torches and rifles, their voices a low, angry growl. They were surrounding the church. "He's in there with the Fletcher girl," someone shouted. The Fletcher girl. They had already twisted the story. He was the kidnapper. He was the villain. The big church doors rattled. "Caleb Rivers!" voice boomed. It was the sheriff, a man named Peterson. "You're in a house of God. Come out with your hands up. Don't make this worse than it already is." Annie shrank against him. "Don't let them take me," she pleaded. "They'll send me back." Caleb looked down at her terrified face, at the serpent tattoo on her arm, and he made a promise, both to her and to the ghost of his sister. "Never again," he said. He pulled a heavy wooden cross from the wall, its base splintered and sharp. He wasn't a religious man, but tonight he was ready to start a war in God's house. He dragged a heavy pulpit in front of the door, barricading them in. The pounding grew louder, more frantic. They weren't trying to arrest him. They were trying to break in. This wasn't about the law. It was about silencing the only two people who knew their filthy secret. Then a new sound, the crackle of fire. They weren't just trying to break the door down. They were trying to burn it down. They were going to burn them alive inside a church to protect their business. Caleb looked at Annie, her small face illuminated by the flickering orange light seeping under the door. Her terror was gone, replaced by a strange, chilling calm. She had accepted her fate, but Caleb hadn't. He looked up at the bell tower, a dark square of hope against the smoke-filled ceiling. There was a rope. There was a way out, but it wasn't a way to escape. It was a way to fight back. He grabbed the bell rope. "Cover your ears," he told Annie. He pulled, and the great bronze bell above them began to toll. Not a gentle Sunday morning chime, but a frantic, desperate clang, a scream of iron that echoed across the plains. He was sending a signal. To who, he didn't know. Maybe to God. Maybe to anyone out there in the darkness who still had a soul. The fire roared, the bell tolled, and in the heart of the inferno, Caleb Rivers prepared to make his stand. The heat was unbearable. Smoke filled the church, thick and acrid, stinging their eyes and choking their lungs. The great wooden doors were glowing now, the fire on the other side eating its way through. The mob outside was howling, their voices a mix of rage and something else. Panic. The tolling bell was an accusation, a judgment ringing out across the quiet frontier. They wanted this done quickly and quietly. Caleb was giving them the opposite. He tied the end of the bell rope around a pillar, letting the bell swing and clang on its own. A maddening, relentless alarm. He scooped Annie up. She was coughing, her small body limp in his arms. "The tower," he gasped, his voice raw. "We have to get to the tower." He found the narrow, winding stairs hidden behind the altar and started to climb. Each step was an agony, his lungs screaming for air. Below them, the main doors of the church finally gave way with a deafening crash, and the mob poured in, their faces demonic in the firelight. They saw the empty church and the swinging bell rope, and their rage turned to confusion. "Where'd they go?" a man yelled. Then a sharp-eyed man, the banker, Ben Cartwright, pointed up. "The tower!" They started for the stairs, a wave of armed men ready to finish the job. Caleb kicked the heavy trap door to the bell chamber shut, just as the first of them reached the top of the stairs. He heard them pounding on the wood below. He was trapped, 100 feet up in a wooden box, with a fire raging below and a mob trying to break in. He looked around desperately. The belfry had 4 large, open arches, one on each side, looking out over the town and the dark plains beyond. There was no escape. This was it, the end of the line. He held Annie close, shielding her face from the smoke. "I'm sorry," he whispered. He had failed. He had brought her here only to die with him. But Annie wasn't looking at him. She was looking out through the archway, her eyes fixed on something in the distance. "Look," she breathed. Caleb followed her gaze. Out on the plains, far beyond the edge of town, another light had appeared, a single lantern swinging back and forth in a slow, deliberate arc. It was a signal. The bell, his desperate, hopeless ringing, had been answered. Hope, a dangerous and unfamiliar feeling, surged through him. But who was it? And would they get here in time? The pounding on the trap door was splintering the wood. It would only hold for another minute, maybe 2. The mob below was getting impatient. "Just burn the whole tower down," someone screamed. Cartwright's voice cut through the noise. "No, you fool! I want him alive! He needs to tell us what she told him." It wasn't just about silencing them anymore. They were afraid that Annie had already talked, afraid that their whole rotten enterprise was about to be exposed. Caleb looked from the splintering door to the distant lantern, then back to Annie. He had to buy time. He ripped a length of his shirt, handed it to Annie, and pointed to his canteen. "Wet this. Breathe through it." Then he took his Colt, checked his bullets, 5 left, and took up a position by the trap door. This wasn't a fortress. It was a tomb. But if he was going to die, He was going to take the devil's banker with him. The trap door burst open, and the first man's head and shoulders appeared. It wasn't Cartwright. It was one of his hired thugs. Caleb didn't hesitate. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space. The man screamed and fell backward, taking two more of his friends down the narrow staircase with him in a tangle of limbs. The advance stopped. They hadn't expected him to fight back so fiercely. They had seen a cornered animal. They had forgotten he was a wolf. "Next one through that door gets the same," Caleb yelled, his voice echoing in the sudden silence. "But send the banker up. He and I have business to discuss." A tense quiet fell over the church, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the distant, lonely tolling of the bell. Then Cartwright's voice, cold and controlled, drifted up. "You're a dead man, Rivers. You have nowhere to run." "I'm not running," Caleb called back. "I'm waiting. Your business is burning, Cartwright, and someone's coming to see the fire." The bluff hung in the air. Did Cartwright believe him? Did he know about the signal? The banker had a choice to make: storm the tower and risk more dead men, or wait and see if Caleb's threat was real. Caleb prayed he would wait. He reloaded the spent cartridge, his hands steady. He now had a full 6 shots, one for Cartwright, one for the sheriff, and 4 more for anyone else who felt lucky. He glanced out the archway again. The distant light was gone. Were they coming, or had they vanished into the night? He was betting his life and Annie's on a single swinging lantern in the dark. And then he heard a new sound from outside, not from the mob in the church, but from the town itself. The sound of dozens of horses moving at a gallop. And they weren't coming from the plains. They were coming from inside the town. The sound of hoofbeats grew, a thunderous rhythm that shook the very foundations of the burning church. But it wasn't cavalry. It wasn't the law. Through the archway, Caleb saw them. A river of armed riders pouring out of the livery stable, the saloon, the darkened houses. It was the rest of the town's men, Fletcher's hired guns, Cartwright's cronies, an army of them. The swinging lantern hadn't been a signal for help. It had been a warning, a signal to the town that the secret was out. It wasn't a rescue coming. It was an execution squad. They had been played. The hope that had flared in his chest died, leaving cold ashes behind. The entire town was a part of it. The sheriff, the banker, the blacksmith, the shopkeeper. All of them complicit, all of them with blood and money on their hands. Redemption Creek wasn't just a town with a secret. The secret was the town. Cartwright's mocking laughter drifted up from below. "You see, Mr. Rivers, there is no one coming to save you. We are the only law here. We are the only justice. Now throw down your weapon. The girl lives. You die. That is my final offer." The lie was so blatant it was almost funny. They would never let Annie live. She knew too much. She was the loose thread that could unravel everything. Caleb looked at Annie. Her face was smudged with soot, her eyes reflecting the fire, but the fear was gone. In its place was a hard, cold resolve that no child should ever possess. "He's right," she said, her voice steady. "They will kill us both." Caleb looked at his pistol. 6 bullets, an army outside, a mob below, a fire raging around them. There was no way out, not alive anyway. "I won't let them take you," he said, the promise tasting like ash in his mouth. He knew what he had to do, the last, terrible choice a man could make. Better a quick, merciful end from his hand than what they had planned for her. He raised the pistol, not at the trap door, at Annie. She didn't flinch. She just looked at him, her dark eyes filled with a terrible understanding. She nodded just once, a silent agreement. It was a moment of impossible horror, a guardian raising a gun to the child he was sworn to protect. He cocked the hammer, his hands shaking. "Forgive me," he whispered. But before he could pull the trigger, something smashed through the stained glass window high on the church wall opposite the bell tower. It wasn't a bullet. It was a rope, with a grappling hook on the end. A second later, another one crashed through a different window. And a third. Figures began to rappel down the ropes into the heart of the burning church, right into the middle of Cartwright's stunned men. They moved with a silent, deadly efficiency that spoke of military training. They weren't lawmen. They were something else entirely. Gunshots erupted from below, not the wild, panicked shots of a mob, but controlled, disciplined volleys. The howls of the townsmen turned into screams of pain and surprise. The cavalry had arrived after all. They had just used the back door. A man's head appeared at the archway of the belfry, not from the stairs, but from a rope thrown from the roof. He was dressed in black, his face grim. "Caleb Rivers?" he asked, his voice calm amidst the chaos. Caleb, stunned, could only nod. The man tossed a coiled rope to him. "The Pinkertons. We got a tip from a school teacher. Seems she's been documenting the town's business for months. Your little bell-ringing party confirmed her story. Now, are you coming, or do you plan to get roasted?" The school teacher, the one person who had seemed invisible, quiet, harmless. She had been their salvation. Caleb wasted no time. He tied the rope around Annie, checked the knot twice, and lowered her out of the belfry into the arms of another agent waiting below. The mob, caught between the fire and the surprise attack, was in full retreat, being cut down or captured by the disciplined agents. Caleb could see Cartwright, his fine suit smudged with soot, trying to slip out a side door, only to be met by a waiting Pinkerton. It was over. The battle was won. Caleb rappelled down, his boots hitting the floor of the nave. The church was an inferno, but the agents were already leading prisoners out into the town square. Annie ran to him, and for the first time, he saw not a victim, not a survivor, but just a little girl. She was crying, but these were not tears of pain or terror. They were tears of relief. He knelt and held her, the promise he'd made in the filthy backyard finally fulfilled. She was safe, but as he looked around at the chaos, at the captured, snarling faces of the townsfolk, he saw the true depth of the sickness. He saw Sheriff Peterson in handcuffs, his face a mask of disbelief. He saw Dolores Fletcher, spitting curses at her captors. He saw dozens of men he'd passed on the street, now revealed as monsters. He had cut the head off the serpent, but the body was still writhing. The lead Pinkerton agent, a man with a scarred face and cold eyes, approached him. "You've caused a hell of a mess here, Rivers." "It was a mess long before I got here," Caleb replied. "Fair enough," the agent conceded. "The school teacher, Mrs. Patterson, her records are extensive. Bills of sale, destinations, names that go all the way to the territorial governor." Caleb's stomach tightened. This was bigger than a town. It was a network that stretched across the entire territory. "What about the other children?" he asked. The agent's face hardened. "That's the next part of the job. Annie is the only one who can identify the buyers. She's the key to bringing the whole thing down." And in that moment, Caleb understood. Annie's ordeal wasn't over. It was just beginning. She had escaped Redemption Creek, but now she had to face the powerful, wealthy men she had been sold to. She had to be a witness. He looked at her, so small and fragile, and knew that the world would now ask her to be a hero. It was too much to ask of a child, but he also knew he wouldn't let her face it alone. "Then we've got a long ride ahead of us," Caleb said. The agent raised an eyebrow. "We?" "She goes nowhere without me," Caleb said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "I started this. I'm going to finish it." The journey to the territorial capital in Denver was a quiet one. They rode with a detachment of Pinkertons, a small armed convoy moving through a land that suddenly felt full of shadows. Every stranger on the trail was a potential threat. Every distant town a possible nest of the serpent's brood. The network was vast and its tendrils were everywhere. Annie rarely spoke. She rode beside Caleb, her small face set in a permanent mask of solemnity. He could see the weight of what she had to do pressing down on her. In her mind, she was revisiting the faces of the men who had bought her, cataloging the details of their cruelty. She was no longer just a victim. She was a weapon, and the burden of it was almost too much to bear. One night, as they sat by the fire, she finally broke her silence. "My real name is Lily," she said, staring into the flames. "My parents died of fever on the trail. The man who took me to the orphanage, he had the serpent tattoo on his wrist. It was all connected, a chain of predation stretching from the cities of the East to the forgotten corners of the West. Children weren't just being taken from orphanages. They were being funneled into a pipeline that started the moment they lost their families. The system didn't just exploit orphans, it created them. Caleb felt a familiar, helpless rage build inside him. He reached into his shirt and pulled out the small silver locket. He opened it. Inside was a tiny faded portrait of a smiling young girl with dark hair and bright eyes, his sister, Sarah. "This was my sister," he said, his voice thick. "She was taken 5 years ago. They left this symbol, the serpent, carved on her bedroom door." Annie, Lily, looked from the portrait to Caleb's face. "You were looking for her," she whispered. He nodded. "Always." She reached out a small hand and touched the locket. "She looks like me." A cold dread, colder than any fear he had felt in the burning church, crept over Caleb. He'd seen the resemblance, of course, the same dark hair, the same deep, soulful eyes. But he had dismissed it as a coincidence, a trick of the mind. Now, hearing her say it, the possibility hit him like a physical blow. Could it be? After all these years? He looked at her, truly looked at her, at the shape of her face, the way she held her head. The resemblance was more than just passing. It was uncanny. "What was your last name?" he asked, his heart pounding. I don't remember," she said, her brow furrowing in concentration. "They told us to forget our old names. They said we belonged to the family now. That was what they called it. The family. The family. The name of the organization." He had to know. He asked the lead agent, the man with the scarred face, whose name was Cole. "The records the school teacher kept," Caleb said, his voice urgent. "Did they have the children's real names?" Cole looked at him strangely. "Some of them." "Why?" "I need to see the file for the girl they called Annie." Cole grumbled about protocol, but eventually retrieved a leather-bound ledger from his saddlebags. He flipped through the pages, written in Mrs. Patterson's neat, precise script. He found the entry. "Here she is, Annie Morrison, arrived 6 months ago. Before that, let's see, records from the St. James Orphanage list her as Lily Rivers." The world stopped. Caleb stared at the girl by the fire. Lily. His Lily. No, his Sarah. The orphanage had gotten the name wrong. Or maybe she'd been too young, too traumatized to say her own name clearly. Sarah. It had to be. He stumbled over to her, his legs unsteady. He held out the locket. "Your name, is it Sarah?" Her eyes went wide. A flicker of something, a memory long buried, sparked in their depths. "Sarah," she whispered, the name a foreign sound on her tongue. "My mother used to sing me a song. Sleep now, Sarah dear." It was her. After 5 years of searching, of chasing ghosts and rumors, of living with a hole in his soul, he had found her. He hadn't just rescued a stranger. He had found his sister. He pulled her into his arms, and for the first time since she was taken, Caleb Rivers cried. He held her as if he could pour all the years of pain and searching into that one embrace, as if he could shield her from all the horrors she had endured. But his discovery, his miracle, came with a terrible new reality. His sister was the star witness, the one person who could bring down the entire conspiracy. And that made her the most valuable and the most endangered person in the entire territory. The men they were hunting, the rich and powerful buyers, would stop at nothing to silence her. They wouldn't just send a town mob. They would send assassins. They would use all their money and influence. The fight wasn't over. It had just become terrifyingly personal. The arrival in Denver was a shock. It wasn't a dusty frontier outpost. It was a city teeming with life, money, and power. And beneath the veneer of civilization, Caleb could feel the serpent's presence. The Pinkertons took Sarah to a safe house, a nondescript brownstone in a quiet part of the city, guarded day and night. But Caleb knew that no house was truly safe. The men they were after owned judges, politicians, and lawmen. A Pinkerton guard could be bought. A safe house could be compromised. The territorial prosecutor, a man named Davies, was ambitious and seemed honest, but even he was swimming in dangerous waters. He explained the situation to Caleb in stark terms. "Sarah's testimony is everything. Without her, all we have is a school teacher's ledger and a bunch of dead townsfolk in a burned-out church. The men on this list," he tapped a piece of paper with names that made Caleb's blood run cold. They're the founders of this city. They're untouchable, unless a victim can point them out in a courtroom and tell the world what they did. Caleb felt trapped. To get justice for his sister, he had to put her through another ordeal. He had to make her face her monsters, not in the dark of night, but in the cold light of a courtroom, where they would try to tear her apart, call her a liar, and paint her as a damaged, unreliable child. He spent his days with her in the safe house. He tried to help her remember, not the bad things, but the good. Their life before, their parents, the songs their mother sang. Little by little, the girl they called Annie began to fade, and Sarah began to return. She remembered their small farm, the name of her pony, the way their father laughed. Each memory was a small victory, a piece of her stolen childhood reclaimed. But with the good memories came the bad. She would wake up screaming in the night, the faces from her nightmares fresh in her mind. And during the day she would go quiet, her eyes distant, as she relived horrors that no child should ever witness. The first attempt came a week later. A delivery boy brought a basket of fruit to the safe house. The guard at the door, a young green Pinkerton, almost accepted it. But Caleb, his senses honed by years on the run, noticed something wrong. The boy's eyes. They were too old, too cold for his young face. Caleb slammed the door just as the boy pulled a derringer from the basket. The shot went wide, splintering the doorframe. The boy vanished into the crowd. It was a message. We can get to you. Anytime. Anywhere. The pressure was mounting. Prosecutor Davies was getting nervous. The trial was set, but his key witness was a fragile, traumatized child who was being actively hunted. He made a decision. They would hold a secret deposition, a closed-door session with a judge, where Sarah's testimony would be officially recorded. It would be just as valid in court, and it would be safer than putting her on the stand in a public trial. But they needed a secure location, somewhere no one would ever think to look. Caleb had an idea. It was risky, insane even, but it was the kind of thinking the enemy wouldn't anticipate. "The Lion's Den," he told Davies and Cole, the Pinkerton leader. "We do it right under their noses." He proposed holding the deposition in the private suite of the fanciest hotel in Denver, the Grand Imperial, the very hotel owned by one of the men on the list, a railroad baron named Marcus Thorne. It was the hub of their social and business lives, the last place they would expect their secrets to be laid bare. It was a gamble of epic proportions. A single misstep, a single suspicious glance, and they would be walking into a slaughterhouse. But Cole, a gambler at heart, saw the brutal logic in it. "They'll be looking for us in the alleys and the slums," he said with a grim smile. "They'll never think to look for us in the penthouse." The plan was set. They had 24 hours to prepare. Sarah would have to walk into the heart of the serpent's nest, surrounded by the very men she was about to condemn, and speak her truth. Caleb felt a knot of fear tighten in his gut. He had brought his sister back from the dead, but was he now leading her to her execution? That night he found her sitting by the window, looking out at the glittering lights of the city. "Are you scared?" he asked her. She shook her head. "Not anymore," she said, her voice quiet but strong. "When I was in that place, I used to pray someone would come and save me. You came. Now it's my turn to save the others." She looked at him, and her eyes weren't the eyes of a child anymore. They were the eyes of a warrior. "I remember their faces," she said. "I remember all of them, and I'm going to make them pay." The next day they would walk into the Grand Imperial Hotel. They would either come out with the testimony that could shatter a corrupt empire, or they wouldn't come out at all. The Grand Imperial Hotel was a palace of polished brass, crystal chandeliers, and whispered conversations. It reeked of money and power. Walking through the lobby felt like walking on the serpent's back. Caleb was disguised as a wealthy cattleman, with Sarah on his arm as his daughter. Cole and his Pinkertons were scattered throughout the lobby, invisible, dressed as bellhops, guests, and waiters. Prosecutor Davies and the judge were already waiting upstairs in the suite, registered under false names. Every step was a risk. Caleb saw them, the men from the list, Marcus Thorne, the railroad baron holding court by the grand staircase, Judge Hemlock, another supposed pillar of the community, laughing with a senator. Their faces were calm, confident, arrogant. They had no idea that the little girl in the pretty dress walking past them was the ghost who had come to haunt them. Sarah's hand tightened on Caleb's arm, but her face remained a perfect, calm mask. She was stronger than he could have ever imagined. They reached the elevator without incident. The ride up to the penthouse suite felt like an eternity. The moment the suite door closed behind them, the tension broke. Sarah sagged against him, her composure crumbling. "They were all there," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I saw them." "I know," Caleb soothed her, "but you're safe now. Just a little longer." The judge, a stern but fair man named Wallace, set up his recording equipment. Davies laid out his papers. The deposition was about to begin. Cole stood guard by the door, his hand never far from his weapon. But Caleb couldn't shake a feeling of unease. It was too easy. They had walked in without a challenge. It didn't feel right. He walked to the window and looked down at the street 5 floors below. The usual traffic of carriages and pedestrians. Nothing seemed out of place. And then he saw it. A glint of light from the rooftop of the building across the street. The sun reflecting off something metal. A telescope? Or a rifle scope? They hadn't been followed. They had been anticipated. "It's a trap," Caleb hissed. "There's a sniper across the street." Cole and Davies looked at him in disbelief. "How could they possibly know?" Davies stammered. "It doesn't matter," Cole said, his voice grim. He was already pulling the heavy velvet curtains shut. "No one goes near the windows." But the sniper wasn't the only threat. The real trap was inside the hotel. They had walked into a cage and the owners were about to lock the door. A knock came at the door. Not the discreet knock of a hotel staffer, but a heavy, authoritative pound. Cole drew his pistol. "Who is it?" "Hotel security," a muffled voice called out. "We have a report of a disturbance." It was a lie. The disturbance was about to begin. Cole looked at Caleb, a silent question in his eyes. Caleb nodded. This was it. Cole unlocked the door and threw it open, using the door itself as a shield. The hallway wasn't filled with hotel security. It was filled with at least a dozen men, all armed with rifles, led by a cold-eyed killer Caleb recognized as Thorne's personal enforcer. The firefight was instant and brutal. The narrow hallway erupted in a storm of lead and splinters. Cole and another Pinkerton laid down covering fire, pushing the attackers back from the doorway. Caleb shoved Sarah, Davies, and the judge into the bedroom, the safest room, farthest from the windows and the door. "Stay down," he yelled over the roar of the guns. He grabbed a heavy mahogany dresser and dragged it in front of the bedroom door, creating a barricade. Bullets tore through the walls of the suite. Crystal glasses shattered. Expensive furniture was turned into firewood. The suite had become a war zone. Caleb knew they couldn't hold out for long. The Pinkertons in the lobby would be dealing with their own fight, unable to help. They were cut off and outnumbered. The attackers were trying to pin them down, to keep them away from the windows, while the sniper across the street waited for a clear shot. It was a perfectly coordinated trap. Then a new sound, a rhythmic creaking from outside. Caleb peered cautiously through a slit in the curtains. His blood went cold. A window washer's platform was being lowered from the roof of the hotel. On it were 2 men with shotguns. They were coming in through the windows, pinned from the front, attacked from the side, with a sniper waiting to pick off anyone who showed their face. It was a checkmate. They were going to be wiped out, and the official story would be a tragic shootout between rival gangs. Thorne and his friends would be miles away, their hands clean. Caleb looked at the barricaded bedroom door. Sarah was in there. He had found his sister only to lead her to her death in a gilded cage. Rage, pure and primal, washed over him. He would not let it end like this. He looked around the trash suite, his eyes searching for a weapon, for an advantage, for anything. He saw the fireplace, and next to it, a heavy brass poker. And in that desperate moment, a crazy, suicidal plan began to form in his mind. He was going to fight fire with fire. He was going to burn his way out. "They're coming through the windows," Caleb yelled, grabbing an oil lamp from a table. Cole, pinned down at the front door, gave him a look that was part disbelief, part grim respect. There was no time for questions. Caleb smashed the lamp against the wall near the windows, spilling oil across the expensive carpet and curtains. He took another lamp and did the same. The attackers on the platform were leveling their shotguns, ready to blast their way in. Caleb took the heavy brass poker and thrust it into the roaring fireplace until its tip glowed red hot. He looked at Cole. "Fall back to the bedroom. Now!" Cole and his remaining man fired a final volley down the hall and retreated, dragging a wounded agent with them. They scrambled behind the barricade of the bedroom door just as the men in the hallway charged forward. At the same moment, the windows of the suite exploded inward in a shower of glass as the men on the platform opened fire. Caleb didn't wait. He took the glowing poker and touched it to the oil-soaked curtains. The room went up in a whoosh of flame. A wall of fire erupted between them and the attackers, engulfing the windows and the front of the suite. The men on the platform screamed as the flames leaped out at them. The men in the doorway recoiled from the sudden, intense heat. Caleb had created a barrier, a temporary reprieve, but he had also turned their gilded cage into a fiery death trap. Smoke poured into the bedroom. "Everyone out!" Caleb roared, pointing to the adjoining bathroom. "Wet towels! Cover your faces!" The smoke was thick and black. They were coughing, their eyes streaming. They had traded a quick death by bullet for a slow one by suffocation. But Caleb wasn't done. His crazy plan had a second act. He looked at the wall separating their suite from the next one over. It was lath and plaster, not brick. He grabbed the heaviest thing he could find, a marble bust of some forgotten Roman emperor, and hurled it against the wall. It cracked the plaster. He did it again, and again. Cole understood immediately and joined him, using the butt of his rifle. They were breaking out. The attackers, confused by the fire, started shooting blindly through the flames. Bullets whizzed through the smoke-filled room. But Caleb and Cole kept hammering at the wall, adrenaline and desperation fueling their blows. Finally, with a splintering crash, they broke through into the next suite. It was empty. "Go! Go!" Caleb pushed Sarah, the judge, and Davies through the hole first. Cole and his men followed, providing cover fire back through the hole. Caleb was the last one through. As he scrambled into the relative safety of the new room, he saw Marcus Thorne's enforcer step through the flames, his face a mask of hate, his clothes smoldering. He raised his pistol to fire. Caleb didn't have time to draw his own. He threw the one thing he had left in his hand, the heavy brass poker. It flew end over end and struck the enforcer square in the chest. The man staggered back, a look of surprise on his face, right into the heart of the fire. Caleb didn't wait to watch him burn. They were out of the frying pan, but the whole hotel was now the fire. Alarms were ringing. People were screaming in the hallways. The hotel was in chaos. This was their only chance to escape. Cole took the lead. "Stay close. Look like you belong here." They burst out of the new suite and into the hallway, joining the throngs of panicked guests fleeing the fire. In the confusion, they were just another group running for their lives. They took the service stairs, avoiding the crowded main staircase, where Thorne's men would surely be looking for them. They moved down floor by floor, a desperate little island of fugitives in a sea of chaos. They made it to the lobby. It was a madhouse. Firemen were rushing in, hotel staff were trying to direct the crowds, and Pinkertons were fighting a running battle with Thorne's men near the entrance. They were trapped. Just as it seemed they were cornered, a massive figure pushed through the crowd. It was the hotel's head of security, a giant of a man Caleb had noticed in the lobby earlier. He was one of Thorne's men, and he was coming right for them. But he didn't draw a gun. Instead, he grabbed Caleb's arm. "This way!" He grunted, his voice urgent. "The kitchens! There's a way out back!" Caleb was stunned. Was this another trap? The man saw the suspicion in his eyes. "Thorne pays me, but he doesn't pay me enough to burn to death for him. Now move!" He was a rat deserting a sinking, burning ship. He led them through a maze of service corridors, into the steam and clatter of the main kitchen, and out a loading dock door into a back alley. They were out. They were alive. They stood in the alley, breathing in the cool, clean air, watching the smoke pour from the top floors of the Grand Imperial. The fire alarms were their victory song. Sarah leaned against Caleb, exhausted but safe. Davies was clutching his briefcase, which held the single, most important thing to come out of the chaos: the judge's notes. They hadn't gotten the official deposition, but they had the next best thing. The judge had taken down every word of Sarah's testimony before the shooting started. It was enough. It was everything. Cole clapped Caleb on the shoulder. Rivers, you are, without a doubt, the craziest son of a bitch I have ever met. Caleb looked at the burning hotel, a monument to the greed and corruption that had almost cost them everything. They built their empire, he said, his voice low. I just gave it a little fire to keep it warm. He had won the battle, but the war was far from over. Thorne and his associates had lost their fortress, but they were still free, and they would be more desperate, more dangerous than ever. The city was no longer safe. The entire territory was a chessboard, and they were the most wanted pieces. But as he looked down at his sister, who was looking back at him with trust and love in her eyes, he knew he wouldn't run. He had found her. He had saved her. Now he would help her get the one thing she deserved more than anything else: justice, no matter the cost. The fire at the Grand Imperial changed everything. It was no longer a secret war fought in the shadows. It was front-page news. The official story was a gas leak, a tragic accident. But rumors spread like wildfire. Rumors of a massive gun battle, of powerful men trying to silence a witness. The city was buzzing with speculation. Marcus Thorne and his associates went to ground, issuing statements of profound sadness over the destruction of the city's finest landmark, all while plotting their next move. They had been exposed, not legally, but in the court of public opinion, and that made them desperate. They couldn't risk a public trial with Sarah as the star witness. They had to make sure she never made it to the courtroom. The Pinkertons moved them every night, from one safe house to another, never staying in one place for more than a few hours. Caleb slept with his gun in his hand. He saw assassins in every shadow. The strain was immense, especially on Sarah. She was brave, but she was still a child who had been through hell. One night she came to him, her face pale. I can't do it, Caleb, she whispered. I can't face them. Every time I close my eyes, I see their faces. In court, with everyone staring. I'll freeze. Caleb's heart broke for her. He had pushed her, relied on her strength, and he had forgotten the toll it was taking. He held her hand. It was cold as ice. You don't have to, he said gently. We can disappear. I can take you somewhere far away. Change our names. We can be safe. Hope flickered in her eyes, but then it died. And the other girls? She asked. The ones still in the camps? The ones still waiting to be sold? What about them? Who will speak for them if I don't? The terrible adult wisdom in her voice silenced him. She was right. Their safety would be bought with the continued suffering of countless others. It was an impossible choice. Her peace of mind or justice for the forgotten. Before Caleb could answer, Cole entered the room, his face grim. We have a problem, he said. A big one. Judge Wallace has been found dead. An accident. Fell down the stairs at his home. It wasn't an accident, it was a message. They were killing off the witnesses. The judge was gone. The prosecutor, Davies, was terrified. Who was next? And that's not all, Cole continued, his voice low. Thorne has filed a motion. He's petitioning for custody of the orphan girl Annie Morrison. He's claiming you kidnapped her from her legal guardians, the Fletchers, and that you've been manipulating a traumatized child for your own gain. It was a brilliant, evil move. They were using the law itself as a weapon. They would drag Sarah into a custody hearing, not a criminal trial. They would put her on trial, paint her as a liar, and Caleb as a villain. And the judge presiding over the hearing? Judge Hemlock, the same man Caleb had seen laughing with Thorne in the hotel lobby. The serpent was eating the law from the inside out. They were checkmated. If they showed up in court, Hemlock would give custody to Thorne, and Sarah would vanish forever. If they didn't show up, they would be fugitives, proving Thorne's story that Caleb was a kidnapper. There was no legal way to win. They had run out of good options. So we fight, Caleb said, a cold calm settling over him. Cole looked at him. Fight how? We can't shoot our way into the courthouse. No, Caleb agreed. We can't win their game. So we changed the board. He turned to Sarah. You said you wanted to speak for the other girls. What if you could? Not in a courtroom, but somewhere else. A new plan began to form, more audacious and desperate than burning down the hotel. They were going to hold their own trial. A trial in the court of public opinion? The biggest newspaper in the territory, the Denver Tribune, was run by an editor named Elijah Reed, a notorious crusader who hated corruption more than he feared powerful men. They would leak everything to him: the school teacher's ledger, the judge's notes from the deposition, and most importantly, Sarah's own story in her own words. They would bypass the corrupt courts entirely and take their case directly to the people. It was their last desperate gambit. They would expose the entire conspiracy from Redemption Creek to the governor's mansion. It would either trigger a revolution or get them all killed. Most likely both. They sent a coded message to Elijah Reed. He agreed to a meeting. The location was the one place no one would ever suspect: the burned-out shell of the Grand Imperial Hotel, a fitting place to lay a corrupt empire to rest. That night, under a full moon, Caleb and Sarah walked through the skeletal remains of the hotel. Ash crunched under their boots. The ghosts of the battle seemed to linger in the air. Elijah Reed was waiting for them in what used to be the grand ballroom, a small, fearless man with ink-stained fingers and fiery eyes. They gave him everything. Sarah, her voice shaking but clear, told him her story, from the day she was taken, to the horrors of Redemption Creek, to the faces of the men who bought her. Reed listened, his expression growing darker with every word. When she was finished, he was silent for a long moment. "If I print this," he said, his voice heavy, "they will destroy me. They will burn my press to the ground. They may even kill me." "I know," Caleb said. Reed looked at Sarah, at this small child who had endured so much and was still willing to fight. A look of fierce determination came into his eyes. "I'll do it," he said. "Tomorrow's morning edition will be one this city never forgets." They had fired their last shot. Now all they could do was wait for the dawn and see what world it revealed. The next morning, Denver awoke to a bombshell. The front page of the Tribune was covered in a single massive headline: "The Serpent in Our City, a Child's Story of Slavery and Corruption." Elijah Reed had printed it all: Sarah's testimony, verbatim, excerpts from the school teacher's ledger, the names of Marcus Thorne and every other man on the list, including Judge Hemlock and the territorial governor himself. It was a declaration of war. By 8 a.m., the city was in an uproar. People gathered on street corners, reading the paper aloud, their faces a mixture of shock, disbelief, and growing rage. The story was so horrific, so detailed, that it was impossible to dismiss. It laid bare the rotten core of their society. Thorne and his associates responded immediately. They issued denials, calling it libelous yellow journalism. They had their pet lawman issue a warrant for Elijah Reed's arrest. They sent thugs to the Tribune's offices to smash his printing presses, but it was too late. The spark had been lit. The first sign that the tide was turning came from an unexpected place. The working men of the city, the miners, the railroad workers, the factory hands, had been brutally exploited by men like Thorne for years. They saw in Sarah's story a reflection of their own powerlessness. They weren't just reading the news, they were living it. They left their jobs and began to march. They formed a human shield around the Tribune's building, protecting it from Thorne's thugs. What started as a protest soon became a mob. But it wasn't a mob of hate like the one in Redemption Creek. It was a mob demanding justice. They marched on the courthouse where Judge Hemlock was supposed to preside over Sarah's custody hearing. They chanted her name. "Sarah! Sarah! Sarah!" From a window in a boarding house across the street, Caleb and Sarah watched the scene unfold. The city was rising up. For her. Inside the courthouse, the powerful men were panicking. Their carefully constructed world was crumbling. The governor barricaded himself in his mansion. Judge Hemlock, seeing the thousands of angry faces outside, slipped out a back door and fled the city. Marcus Thorne found himself trapped, a king in a castle under siege. The U.S. Marshals, seeing the utter breakdown of local authority and armed with the evidence from the newspaper, were finally forced to act. They stormed the courthouse and Thorne's known residences, not with warrants from a compromised local judge, but with federal authority. Arrests were made. The serpent's head was being cut off, not by a lone gunslinger, but by the will of the people he had helped to awaken. By nightfall, the city was calm, but transformed. Marcus Thorne and most of his inner circle were in federal custody. The governor had resigned, The corrupt system had been shattered. In the quiet of their room, Caleb looked at Sarah. She was watching the last of the crowds disperse, her face illuminated by the gaslights below. She had done it. This small, broken girl had brought down an empire. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice small. "The fighting is," Caleb said. "The healing, that will take time." He knew that the scars of what she'd endured would never fully fade. But for the first time, she had a future. They both did. A few weeks later, they stood on the platform of the train station, ready to leave Denver for good. The Pinkerton, Cole, was there to see them off. The federal government had offered Caleb a full pardon and a substantial reward for his role in uncovering the conspiracy. He had accepted the pardon, but refused the money. "I wasn't after a reward, he told Cole. He had gotten what he came for. His sister. Elijah Reed was there too. His newspaper was now the most powerful voice in the territory. He had become a hero. "Where will you go?" he asked. Caleb looked down at Sarah, who was holding his hand tightly. "Somewhere quiet," he said. "Somewhere we can just be a family." He had bought a small ranch in a remote corner of the territory, a place with clean air and open skies, far from the rot of cities, a place to heal. As they boarded the train, Sarah turned and looked back at the city that had been her prison and ultimately her liberation. She had faced her monsters and won. She was no longer Annie, the victim. She was no longer Lily, the forgotten orphan. She was Sarah Rivers, the girl who had brought the serpents to their knees. The train pulled away from the station, chugging towards a new life. Caleb put his arm around his sister. The road ahead would be long, but for the first time in 5 years, he wasn't chasing ghosts. He was going home. The story of Redemption Creek and the Serpent Conspiracy became a legend in the West, a cautionary tale about the darkness that can hide beneath the veneer of civilization and the extraordinary courage it takes to drag that darkness into the light. It's a story that reminds us that heroes aren't always the ones with the fastest gun. Sometimes they're the ones who have every reason to be silent, but choose to speak anyway. And they never did find Judge Hemlock. Some say he made it to Mexico, but others tell a different story. They say a quiet, scarred-faced Pinkerton agent with cold eyes followed him south. They say justice doesn't always happen in a courtroom. Some debts get paid in the desert. If you were moved by Sarah's story of courage, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. It really helps us keep finding these incredible tales from the frontier. And drop a comment below, letting us know what you think is the true meaning of justice. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.